Place in which I rant. This rant is for Anime Watcher, who wants me to rant about Freedom Toons. And oh boy, the straw man with this guy is pretty incredible. I just watched this video of him talking about Nazis versus the 20th century to now, and the point of the cartoon was kind of about this differentiation between Trump and the Trump camp, the Trump people, and what Nazis were like in the 20th century. And the sort of core idea behind the video is to say that these guys who think that Trump is a Nazi think he's a Nazi for reasons like trans people not being able to identify with their gender, not being able to give birth control for free and things like this. Really strawman arguments in the face of what the anti-Trump people actually believe. And for full disclosure, I don't believe Trump is a Nazi. I don't even think the man's a fascist. But to take such a straw man position on on the views of these people, I think is a little bit silly, because the argument tends to be that the reason Trump is a Nazi is because his supporters are not being denounced, who many of them are on the far right, representing the Nazi camp. He doesn't denounce them. The other arguments being the multitude of overtly racist statements that he's made against Latinos and Muslims. I mean, you can find quotes and footage of this stuff. It's not very difficult, and so that's the argument against him. And it's not too difficult to show that that's what the argument is, and then debunk that as a joke. But he takes the most extreme angles of things that most people are not really saying, and then presents them as if that's the crux of the argument. And he has a lot of videos sort of advocating for kind of neoliberal capitalism, and capitalism is great because of freedom, and all of the arguments that we've heard a million times over ad nauseum. All the while, the United States has the same rate of getting out of poverty, the same likelihood of getting out of poverty as India and Bangladesh. And right now, China, a socialist country, has over the U.S. The U.S. has triple the amount of starvation in China, and they're on the road to completely eliminating starvation in their country. And so it's interesting to me, very, very interesting to me, that this person, this Freedom Toons guy, equate totalitarianism and fascism and the evils that have existed in the world with socialist countries that have existed throughout history, that have guaranteed everyone housing, that have guaranteed everyone food, a job, safety, and is saying just privatize everything, and privatizing more stuff is great, and nothing bad ever happened when things were privatized in Chile or Guatemala or Honduras or the U.S. right now. Nothing bad ever happened. Poverty didn't go up. People's lives didn't get worse. Wanting healthcare, that's just a fantasy that all of the developed world has. Just get that out of your head. It feels like the point, and this is the problem that I have with a lot of politically inclined comedy and cartoons, is that the point is more so to straw man someone else's agenda in order to bolster your own, and then say, look at how absurd these straw men that I've crafted are, and then have that be the point of the joke. It's not about making comedic statements that are funny and maybe exaggeratory in nature, but provide a genuine critique of the other side. It's more about saying, just look at how absurd this is, ooh woo, wacky, without making very many substantive points. Going back to the Trump example, he could have very easily made a joke about what these people actually believe, but chose not to. There was a joke there. You could have you could have made a sort of analytical point while also making fun of them. But he goes at the lazy route of taking these straw man arguments that most people are not really arguing for. And so it's the typical libertarian kind of way of doing things is saying, our agenda, our ideology is great, but not really providing real statistics for them. Now, his video on gun reform goes into a bit more detail. It's not really comedically oriented. It's just like saying gun reform is bad because of these things. And I mean, I'm not for gun control either, but I don't even remember most of what he said in the video because it's like a 13-minute video of him like desperately trying to say, hey, don't ban high capacity magazines and stuff. And he has a bunch of statistics for it, and like it's like trying to have a point. Like he has videos where he's trying to have a point, where I can commend him for at least kind of doing it. But most of them provide very straw man arguments, and don't look at all of the facts. Because the thing I always say is that the way that I became a leftist wasn't because I had ideological or emotional reasons. That was a part of it. But I'm very, very against, the kind of left that this guy is critiquing of. Let's all sit in a circle and talk about our feelings, and I'm offended, and that's why I feel this way. That's not a substantive economic systemic critique. What I'm interested in is looking at all of the information and not filtering it through an ideological lens, looking at the information and then trying to come to as close as we can to an objective conclusion based on finding as much information as possible. Where with someone like this, he kind of presents the veneer, the idea of knowing the facts and of having the information and of being right without actually considering all of it, because it's easy enough for him to just sit here and have a libertarian point of view, because there's no institution that's trying to destroy that right now, that's not like independently funded. The left, the actual left, I'm talking about Marxists here, do not have institutional support the way that the right does. Obviously, if you're a Nazi, you're not going to have as much institutional support by any means. But if you're a conservative, a libertarian, you're going to have some level of institutional support. If you're a liberal, a social democrat, maybe not like a Bernie Sanders social democrat, because the media often lies about him, but I mean, he is supported by certain sections of the capitalist class. You're going to do fine. And so, Freedom Toons can get up there and he can lie and he can make straw man arguments, and not very many people are going to necessarily question it because he has the ability to do that. He may not be on the same wavelength as like as some of the liberals, but like they agree on the baseline idea that capitalism is good, and he agrees with like 90% of Americans saying that being overly offended is bad, which I agree with. It's just the way in which he levies that criticism against a very specific group of people who have a broad sweeping economic critique, makes those arguments straw men, saying that you just have pink hair and are super offended about everything and want to punch people who you disagree with. He's able to get away with saying because that's what everyone already thinks. Where most people are not leftists. Most people, real leftists. I'm not talking about liberals or social democrats. I'm talking about leftists. So that institutional support does not exist for us. We're actively being shot down at every chance, because you look at someone like the Wall Street Journal. They had this ginormous article talking about Mao, and how terrible Maoism is. They are obsessed with Maoism at the Wall Street Journal. Constantly, they're constantly talking about it. And it's this sort of fear that the ruling class has of leftist history that's, caused us to hear Marxist evil, bad, ad nauseum. Um, and so Freedom Toons, I can sit here and watch this guy and I can say, okay, he's a decent animator. I don't like his art style very much, but I'm sure he's not like a dumb guy. It's just that he's caught up in this sort of media narrative that wants to seem like it's punk rock, like, oh, we're libertarians, we're not like these offended liberal elites, but that's all a facade, because the majority of people are not like that. This idea of some kind of conniving liberal Marxist elites that are just like controlling everything, um, and that have pink hair and are evil on college campuses and stuff. That's like a tiny, tiny fraction of the people who actually exist in this country. There's a great article by the Atlantic which did a poll that said like 82 percent of Americans oppose political correctness, the vast majority, and it's only rich white people, by and large, who tend to advocate political correctness. And this Freedom Tunes person, people like Jordan Peterson, Mr. Facts Don't Care About Your Feelings, these guys arise out of a false narrative, a false conception that, the world is being driven into this kind of politically correct dystopia. And I'm not in favor of political correctness either. But this idea that it's like controlling society and that it's this big, danger that's everywhere is a total fiction. Um, and he has the freedom to make these straw man arguments against leftists, and against leftist thought, because that institutional media support ultimately exists. And the narrative that he spins is the same narrative that we've been hearing forever now from the elites. It's just that, the elites narrative is doing what it's always done and is trying to mask itself as this cool, edgy punk rock kind of thing that would lead to, cartoons like this and people like what's his name? That British fag, the Paul, was his name Paul? The guy who says conservatism is the new counterculture. You get people like that, and it's like I have to sit here really scratching my head because I mentioned Marxism to anybody, and they go, "Huh? What? Isn't that like the ideology that killed millions of people and all these other things that are considered to just be like a fact of life?" Um, and so, don't like Freedom Tunes. Most of his videos feel like pretty much the same thing. Like if you click on a Sargon of Akkad video or Armored Skeptic, or who's one of these other free market kind of guys, Stefan Molyneux. It's very much in line with that line of thinking. It's just put in a cartoon. Frankly, cartoons that aren't animated very well, don't have a very good art style, and provide the same strawman arguments with an attempt at comedy that ultimately comes off as pandering to a base without providing much of a real analytical critique, and very much of a joke behind it, besides saying, look at this absurd belief that people apparently have, that they definitely have. Can't provide a quote, but, people have this belief. Crazy. Oh, don't criticize capitalism because these people are crazy. Oh, it's not very good. Not a fan.